Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning. So we actually have a bit of a choice now. There were a number of, I got quite a lot of questions about my lengthy answer to the Q&A last week, including a number of people who were quite disturbed by some of the ideas. So I'm happy to finish off and just make some more comments around that, because I understand that was maybe potentially a little disturbing. Also had a few nominations of topics to cover next. One nomination is to look at the issue of women in halacha in great depth and properly try and understand that. I have to warn, though, if we do that topic, it's more halachic than philosophical in essence. So I'm happy to do it, but maybe it deserves a series in its own right, and not for a Sunday morning. I see I'm already making faces. So I'm open for feedback, whether that's something that people want to discuss. I'm also happy to do a short topic of Zionism. We can solve Zionism in two or three sessions. But actually more seriously, try and look properly again at the sort of philosophical underpinnings of the debate and halachic sources around and so on. And try and present a sort of neutral, in the sense, obviously we all have our own personal views, but neutral in the sense of just trying to understand the conversation across the Jewish world. So that seems to be getting nods, at least from here live in the room. So okay, so maybe we'll do that as our next subject. And I see actually on the screen the person who requested women in halacha. You've been outvoted, at least by those who are live here. So Bli Neder, I will do at some time. I'll find a chance in the shul to do like a dedicated series on it, rather than using the Sunday morning slot for that. But again, I'm happy to get feedback from those of you who are listening online. Also, if you want to WhatsApp or text me about topics. But I will do Zionism next, then, based on the live feedback here. And then I'm still waiting for other suggestions of subjects. So please do either tell me here face to face or via WhatsApp or whatever email. Just please do nominate other topics. But Bli Neder, either this year or the next year, we'll start Zionism and do 2-3 weeks on Zionism as a circular, trying to explore it properly. Okay, so I got a number of messages around last week's share. Very uncomfortable with the idea that that there could be things inherent in the Rambam's theology of compromise. It is implicit in that is the idea there could be things in the Torah which moral or spiritual standards aren't held up to the highest degree. The Rambam, again, just to remind ourselves, the Rambam says this in the context of sacrifice, that sometimes that the Torah allows sacrifice, mandates korbanos, demands sacrifice, because this was appropriate for the people at the time who were unable to wean themselves off sacrifice as a mode of worship, given the pagan context of the time. But this isn't an ideal. This isn't the truest and best way of serving Hashem, and we need to understand that the Torah sometimes moves us on a journey, and it accepts where it's a realistic work. It accepts where Jews were up to at the time, and moves them forward from there. Now, I'm not going to go into the controversy around this. That's not our topic today. We discussed that. It's a very, very difficult theology. It opens a whole can of worms in our thoughts. Also, in the context of korbanos, sacrifices in particular, it's difficult because korbanos seem to have such a central place in the Torah. So I'm not here taking sides in that debate and the difficulty of the Rambam's argument in the context of korbanos, which are so central and seem to form a significant part of our tefillos and everything else. I'm not going to explore that, but the application of this idea to other, if you like, smaller topics is an interesting one. And I applied it in line with a piece from Rabbi Nachum Rabinovich to the context of slavery. And I think that was the particular question that I was asked last time, which triggered the discussion again. And again, I repeat the line from the Rambam, which the Rambam says that this is not a limitation in Hashem, that Torah has these reluctance or compromises with where society and where people are up to. This is a weakness in us, the recipients of Torah. We take time to change. Humans take time to change. Now, implicit though in this is that there is something morally less than ideal, problematic about slavery, but the Torah accepts it because that was the realistic assessment of where people were up to. In essence, this is really Chazal. Like so many of the ideas of the Rambam, the Rambam is focusing or crystallizing our understanding of things which really come from Chazal. And the truth is, when you learn the Rambam Mishnah Torah, every halacha in Mishnah Torah almost has been sourced to a Gemara, to a Chazal, or to a Mishnah or something like that. What the Rambam brings to us is always his unique reading of the source. But in essence, this is really a Rashi on the Torah, quoting Chazal by Yefas Torah, which I mentioned already, the beautiful captive, in which the Torah allows the beautiful captive to be brought home by the soldier and eventually become his wife. And Rashi there comments, Lo dibra Chazal, Lo dibra Torah ela keneged Yetzer hara. This is the Torah's reluctant compromise with the Yetzer hara. So if the Torah were to say this forbidden captive is completely forbidden to you, sorry, this beautiful captive is completely forbidden to you, there was a fear, and we know this is the case in the testosterone-fueled battle rage. Soldiers find it hard to control themselves, even decent people. Every legal system accepts that, Israel recently tried one of its soldiers for taking out a captured Palestinian terrorist. And it's an amazing feature of Israel, that's its ability to try its soldiers. But the sentence was manslaughter, not murder, even though the person, in the sense, deliberately killed everyone understood in the heat of battle, when he had just seen this fellow shooting and killing one of his fellow soldiers. This is not a murder. This is a shogeg, if you like. This is a manslaughter. Nonetheless, it's appropriate that this comes to trial. So soldiers in battle rage, it is very, very hard for normal standards of law to be applied. And the Torah accepts this and channels that negativity into as positive a direction as it can, and it builds in protection. She's taken home, she's given time to mourn. She has to be given has to become Jewish, has to convert. If she refuses conversion, by the way, she goes free. This is little known. If she refuses conversion, she goes free. She's not forced to get married. But if the soldier wishes, he converts her, and after that, she has to have the full rights of a normal wife. She can't be taken as a pelegash, as a concubine of the like. She has to have the rights of a full life. So Torah takes something which is a negative situation, built into battle at the time. Armies used to come along with their camps that used to accompany the armies with loot and with spoil and with women folk there. So they brought along, and that was considered part of the spoils of war. So this is no great ideal. The person who takes the Yefas Torah is condemned by Chazal. He's not considered a great individual. Nonetheless, it's accepted by the Torah. So in essence, this thought of the Rambam is there implicit in Chazal already, and just sort of spelled out a little bit and extended by the Rambam. But how bothered are we by this idea that the Torah doesn't always hold the highest moral ideal? So I want to make 2 points principally over here. The first is this is again really built into the halachic system beyond radical and particular one-off cases like the Yefas Torah. This is built into the concept of a halachic system that has differing standards and different options. We have concepts of hidur mitzvah, of beautifying mitzvahs. That means to say that you and I can do the same mitzvah, and you can do it in a beautiful manner, and I can choose to do it in a less than beautiful manner. And I'm yotzer the mitzvah, fulfill the mitzvah, but it's not the mitzvah in the highest level possible. We have chumrah, the concept of being machmir and going lifnim mishur satim, beyond the letter of the law. I mentioned this briefly last week. Actually, we could add this to our list of topics maybe to discuss what chumrah is. Someone can remind me afterwards. I'll add it to my notes, because I think I mentioned it last week when I spoke about this. And what is chumrah? But there is such a thing as chumrah, whether we like it or not, where to apply it, if it's over applied or not. But the concept of chumrah is a legitimate one in avodos Hashem in the right circumstances. And again, it's another example of where the Torah says it's okay if you do X, but you can achieve more by doing X plus 1. We have the concept of midat chasidus. I don't mean modern day chasidus. I mean the concept of chasidus. There have been chasidim throughout the ages. Chasidim harishonim. In the times of the Gemara, there were individuals who were particularly pious, who engaged in piatic practice, who meditated an hour before davening and an hour after davening, that means that tefillah was a different quality davening to our davening. Is this the right or the wrong thing to do? Well, it depends who one is and how one behaves. Throughout the generations, there have been Hasidim, Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, Rabbi Yonah HaChassid, Rabbi Avram, the son of the Rambam, was Rabbi Avram HaChassid. These were individuals who chose to adopt pietic practices beyond the strict requirements of halacha. Every philosophical and hashkafic system to Yiddishkeit, to Judaism, has such an idea. This is, if you're Litvish inclined, maybe you'll express your enhancement of mitzvahs through chumrah. If you're, nowadays we would call it Hasidically inclined, maybe you'll express it through extra zerizos and enthusiasm and energy in the mitzvah. If you're Kabbalistically inclined, so in Kabbalah, there's a whole system of kavanos when you do mitzvahs. You engage in additional kavanos and additional meditative experiences, and these are still practiced in the streets of Jewry to this day. In which my own Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Zobin, who was a very key figure in the world of the Kabbalah of the Vilna Gaon. So he used to daven with kavanos on occasion. And if you look at the Sidurim, which have kavanos, which have the kavanos Arizal, you literally have one word of tefillah at the top of the page, and then you have a page of shemus, of names of Hashem, which are meditative, reflective, contemplative things that one's meant to think about. As one says, each word of tefillah and engage in kavanos and shemus. Many years ago, I lived not far from the Sadia Gur Stiebel on Rehov Shmuel Hanovi, and one Chol HaMoed Sukkos, I made a terrible mistake, never to be repeated again, because I overslept. So I decided to go to the Stiebel to daven, and I ended up davening in the minyan of the Rebbe, and it took the Rebbe some hour and 3/4 to do the Nanuim on Sukkot. And the Nanuim are overtly mystical things. I mean, the Gemara already indicates mysticism behind the Nanuim. This is not a new field of Jewish mysticism. This is an overtly mystical thing. One's turning in every direction and contemplating our Kadosh Baruch is everywhere. The Gemara already discusses thoughts around Nanuim, and it seems the Saduq Rebbe engaged in kavanos around Nanuim. I just found out this is a feature of Saduq spirituality and so on. But for Zobin spirituality, this was a longer hallel than I had expected. But these are things that come. So the idea of hidur mitzvah and enhancing mitzvahs and different standards of mitzvahs is not a new idea. In denominous, right? In monetary disputes, there's an expectation that there's a chiyuv b'dei adam and a chiyuv b'dei shamayim. There's certain monetary obligations which are unenforceable in din and based in, and nonetheless the Gemara will say this is a chiyuv b'dei shamayim. It's the appropriate and right thing to pay. But halacha can't force one to do so, and there are occasions where you should go lifnim mashur sadin, like I can take you to court and claim something off you, and nonetheless it's appropriate for me to back off and not. Then there's a Gemara that says that the Beis Mikdash was destroyed because hemidu dineim al din Torah. They established their din, their legal disputes on the din Torah, on the laws of the Torah. Now that sounds like a great thing. How wonderful it was that Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, were engage in commercial disputes based upon the legalities of the Torah. And the Gemara is saying not like that. If you live in a world in which every interaction and every dispute is immediately pounced upon and dealt with the full force of law, that's also not a decent world. That's not a world that can survive. I'm conscious of their lives. I don't want to cause offence, but one can't live in line with that. Even in law and the good law is obviously practiced like this. When one says something kind, okay, you've got a legal dispute, but is it really worth this? Is this really the sort of world you want to engineer? Does this really make sense? So again, this is a concept of lifnim mishur sadin, and in all these examples, it's understood that the base halacha is what every Jew should aspire to, and there's other things which are for individuals that choose to step forward and go beyond the letter of the law and achieve higher standards. So why is Rabbi Avram ben Arambam Chassid or Rabbi Yonah a Chassid and most of us not? Because these were great figures who felt they could adopt midos chasidus. Why do great Kabbalistic individuals engage in kavanos? Because they're a great Kabbalistic thing, because they are people who find and are capable of achieving spirituality through Kabbalah or through Chassidus, whatever their own particular mode of worship is. So the idea that different folk need different ways or can be held to different standards of spirituality and morality, again, is something that's almost endemic throughout halacha and throughout hashkafa. So we don't spell it out like this, but what this means to say is that halacha is setting a standard which is lower than that which, at least in theory, some humans, or all humans if we maximize ourselves, could aspire to. Halacha is setting a basic threshold, and it's possible to achieve more than that, at least on occasion, or for some individuals, and that's appropriate and right. So this is the first point I want to mention, that as difficult as the Rambam is, in its core, it's part of a family of thought, which maybe the Rambam is taking a little further, or expressing a little bit more sharply than we normally think about it. The second point I made, and I made the mistake of trying to say this by WhatsApp, and I think traumatizing the individual who received my WhatsApp. I said that Torah and halacha are not synonymous with morals. I said there's a difference between morals and halacha. Halacha isn't synonymous with morality. To which my respondent replied, "Should I change religions?" I hope tongue in cheek, but there's a serious point here, and I did promise I would address it in the Sunday morning share. On many levels, halacha isn't the same as morality. And again, for those who have reflected on law, they will understand that all law is like this. Law and morality are not the same things. Morality has to be case by case, particular, circumstantial, detailed, nuanced, depending on each case and each individual. Law has to establish rules. It has to establish a way of doing things which can be applied in a reasonable manner. It has to simplify all the nuances and complexities of life. Otherwise, it's just simply not possible to live. And has to set standards by which we can all know how we're going to function. If I'm going to enter into a commercial relationship with you, I need to know what the commitment will be. And I can't take into account the fact that you're going through a very difficult time, and you've got a relative who's going through this and this is happening in your life, and you've got these and these challenges to well-being, because I can't operate that in a commercial setting. I need to know what's going to go on. Law can't build into it every nuance of the infinite complexity of the human condition, both because it's too complicated and because we're not always privy to what's going on in people's minds. Law sentences criminals to consequences which we all recognize in truth have to have a degree of simplicity and unfairness to them. We don't really know what this individual has gone through in their lives that has led to them engaging in this terrible crime. We don't even know in truth whether they even have free will about this crime. And when we probe the depth of free will, we don't know what's gone on in this person's life and so on. And law can't possibly deal with all these nuances. It has to provide workable, simple rules of operation. And in that sense, halacha is no different, though there aren't a little more, but Avram is
which directs us to how we enforce and utilize the underlying law principle. So, Vasita Tova Yashar.
Yes.
Or in sentencing, for instance, this person took a life and this person took a life, and now they both have the same crime, but they're sentencing different because at that stage they take into account different circumstances. And Allah does have a number of principles that mitigate or change or alter specific conduct.
Excellent. Thank you, Avram. So I'll repeat that question. Avram, I think in a sense you're making 2 points here. One is that law and halacha are built around certain meta principles, which should accord with morality, absolutely. And number 2, law and halacha have to have principles that somewhat mitigate this difference. And for example, in halacha, the name of these 2 principles that we would say, one is Vasisa Hayashar Vahatov, as I see someone just wrote this in the text to me, and also Kadoshim to you, right? The idea of sanctity, the idea of Yashar Vahatov. So the Ramban, who speaks about this, says that it is possible in the realm of moral and spiritual and ben Adam Lamokum, relationship to Hashem interactions, for a person to keep every halacha and be a menuvel, Brishas HaTorah, be a corroded individual. It's possible for a person to keep every monetary and human relationship halacha, and nonetheless be a completely twisted and dishonest individual. And therefore the Torah says, "Vasisa hayasha v'tov," you should do that which is straight and good. And that is correct. These are halachas put in place to mitigate that, but they are not therefore by definition specific laws, and they're by definition not enforceable in court either. And need to be applied by an individual concerned, and they're also by definition private. In other words, at the end of the day, it's between me and Hashem and myself to work out exactly how to apply them. So it is correct that there are mitigations around these things, but formal halacha in the way it stands struggles by definition to deal with every situation and every scenario. By the way, in a moment, I'll share the Rambam's thoughts around the positives of legal loopholes also, but let's just step back from that one moment further. I also see in the chat someone asked, and I'll just address this very briefly, if someone keeps chumras going beyond the letter of the law, is one's schar or reward in olam haba greater? Now, a very, very good question, very important question. And the answer is yes, but let me just explain very briefly what that means. I'm not going to go into the concept of schar and olam haba in too much detail. But if we understand schar and olam haba as reflecting some sort of spiritual and moral and transcendental reality, in other words, the degree to which I've made myself a elevated individual is what we mean by the idea of schar in olam haba. That's it, and it's bound up with our connection to Hashem and our achievements of life. Then by definition, if someone has achieved more, then they have greater spirituality. It's more complicated than that, because it's possible that the individual who was able to do more or take on greater hidur and beauty in their mitzvahs, maybe also have greater opportunities and so on. So the equation or the algorithm to cancel this, to calculate this, will be complicated. But the core idea that an enhanced performance of mitzvahs enhances your spirituality, and thus, by extension, in terms of the questioner, schar is not a controversial one. Again, I'm not. This is not a plug for absurd or even correct applications of chumrah. I'm happy to address chumrah in its own right and explain the pros of chumrah and the cons of chumrah and why it's a subject that he's looking at. But in principle, if someone is enhancing their performance of halacha, leaving aside whether that's through chumrah or other things, but in principle, the enhanced performance of halacha absolutely means an enhanced spirituality, for sure. Yes. No, and that's why I'm separating the two, and I'm using them both just to keep everyone happy. In other words, because I want to evade for now the issue of chumrah, because I don't want to go into it in its own topic, I'm just saying, however we choose to label enhanced performance of mitzvahs, if you choose to label it hidur, you want to call it chumrah, you want to call it lifnei mishra satin, but whether another person wants to call it increased kavanah, it doesn't matter. In each sense, a third person wants to call it midas chasidus. The statement that an enhanced performance of mitzvah enhances on spirituality shouldn't be a controversial statement. That's all I'm saying. How one understands enhanced performance of mitzvah, let each person choose their own language for now, and when we explore more fully the topic, then we'll get to that. Okay, so this is one level of discrepancy between halacha and morality and spirituality. That by definition, any legal system has to give general rules, and it has to be simplified, and it can be mitigated by sort of general principles of common sense application and asisa yashva tov and kadoshim too. But that mitigation is nonetheless only a mitigation. It can't fully resolve it, and it's possible that. And certainly when it comes to the application of halacha in the public sphere, in Beis Din, in community, and so on, halacha can't possibly deal with, nor can any legal system possibly deal with the inner life of a person and their own personal and subjective experiences. It simply can't. It's not equipped to handle that. Yes.
Where they say, if you were so and so, I would have questioned so and so. Because you're a widow, because you're poor, because you're a father, because you're better, I'm going to ask them differently. Saying the halacha is this, but your case,
yes. So there are. So thank you again, Avram Van. I'll just repeat it for those online. There are examples, numerous examples, as you correctly say in the Gemara, in which a psak in a din Torah or in other areas of life will either go with the greatest stringency. So examples where Amoraim were very strict on their co-Amoraim when the Din Torah came. There's a story in which the Gemara talks about workers who messed up their job, and the psak they're given is, for you are chayiv to pay them because I expect you to live to higher standards. And then there are examples where someone is in great distress and halacha is mitigated. So again, I want to emphasize legal systems in general, and halacha equally so, do to the best of their ability take into account circumstances. But it's clunky, it's chunky, it has to be like that. So someone comes for a sentencing and they've had a very difficult life or they've expressed regret, then again, the sentencing may be reduced or raised, but these are chunky systems. They can't delve into the depth of circumstances. So halacha has concepts like that. It has hefsed merubah, a great loss. It has a tzorach gadol, a great need, tzorach tzibur, a communal need. There's many areas of psak. And almost every day in answering a shaila, particularly this comes up frequently in kashrus issues. I may say to the shoel, to the questioner, is this part of a set? Is it a valuable porcelain plate, or is it just a cheap Kellogg's bowl that can be chucked out? Halacha has built into this many degrees of flexibility around circumstances, but at the end of the day, no legal system and halachic system equally cannot take into account specific things. So in that sense, and I think so far not super controversially and not troubling so. On one level, halacha isn't synonymous with morality. We'll see in a minute it goes much deeper than that, but that's one level of distinction.
I'm going back 53 years here, but when I did my law degree at Oxford in my final exam, in the jurisprudence paper, the jurisprudence is like philosophy.
Yes.
I remember I quoted an article by Mr. Justice Silver in the Harvard Law Review 1961. It was called Law and Morality in Jewish Jurisprudence. And I think he argued that halacha was different from other legal systems. It was somehow more, also morality, also trying to enforce morality. I'll see if that online, if I can find the article to see what he argued.
I'd like to see what he says. Again, I want to emphasize, and this is why I expressed my regret that I started a WhatsApp conversation with someone and clearly caused trouble. I'm not arguing here, chas v'shalom, that halacha is an amoral or immoral system. And clearly it's informed by moral values amongst others, spiritual values, moral values, and the like. I'm simply saying it's not synonymous with it. They're not identical. And I didn't mean my comment when I said flippantly. Someone wrote back to me, very troubled by what I said. I meant it seriously. These aren't things that WhatsApp is designed to address. It can only be in the forum of a proper sharing discussion. I'm not chas v'shalom arguing that there's a wide gulf between the two, and that isn't a system informed by moral care and moral sensitivity and moral values. I'm simply arguing it's not synonymous. It's not identical. And I'm preceding that by saying that that's built into the concept of law, that it can't be synonymous. We'll then look at the deeper ramifications of this, because in essence, part of what I'm saying by slavery is that or Rambam is saying, the Chazal is saying about Ifas Torah, is that in an ideal moral world, a higher standard would be expected, but in the realistic treatment of Klal Yisrael, this was a basic moral level that was sufficient.
Morality is a set.
Yes.
Where do we get our from? Would you say that the stories in the Torah?
So for example, the stories in the Torah, the midrashim, the Agadic literature, the stories in the Torah, the works of Musa, and drawing meta themes from halacha. So when you learn halacha, it's clear there's values that lie behind halacha. The Torah has an interest in yashrus, in tov, in kedusha, in looking after the vulnerable, in respect for the needy, in self-control, you can. Soloveitchik, by the way, interestingly, dedicated a lot of his works to alluding to trying to derive a philosophical and ethical system from the Torah. And he kept on saying, one day, I'll do this. To the best of my knowledge, he never did that. And I suspect he never did that because it's a little impossible to do. Meaning we can draw, you can draw simplistic things that we all know, and I've just labeled some of them. But to develop a holistic system purely from halacha, I don't think it's possible. I think we need to draw on medrash and hashkafa and philosophy and Kabbalah, whatever one puts into one's worldview. I don't think it can be drawn solely from halacha, but certainly halacha is a very rich source for understanding the underlying moral values of the Torah.
I think that's one of the reasons why we have a Din Torah, as it were. We don't go to their courts because it's a whole different. It is a different system to a halachic system. A typical example of security for costs in England, if you want to take someone to court, they can throw somebody to you saying, we don't mind being sued by you, but have you got the money to pay us?
Yes.
And if you don't, you go away and you have to drop the action in Yiddish court, as it were. It doesn't matter who it is, and it doesn't cost you to go to court. And all these barriers that are put there in the other courts, they're just not moral. So I think that may be where the halachic.
I'm not going to go into too much detail now about differences between Basin and secular courts, but it's not controversial to say that there are fundamentally different values that lie behind the two systems, and B, the way the system, the legal system works is completely different. I mean, you're absolutely right, and we look at halacha and we try and draw out of that values, absolutely. So again, I perhaps stupidly in my text, and I apologize for this. I said this in a manner. I'm simply saying halacha and morality are not synonymous. I'm not claiming there's a gulf between the two, that they represent two completely different ideas, but they can't be and aren't synonymous. Law has to work in a certain way, and to a certain degree, and we need to reflect on morality. Now again, I'm aware this opens a can of worms, because if we could just say, if we could be very legalistic about it, just keep halacha and that's everything taken care of, we would avoid worrying about any of these things, and we wouldn't need to probe and question our values and what the values we're bringing. As soon as we talk about values, one has room for debate. One can question about how influenced one is in one's value system by contemporary 21st century thinking, by materialism, by secularism, by external philosophy, and so on and so forth. Is this really a Torah-dic value, right? Is this really an expression of what the Torah wants? But we have no choice, meaning, by the way, if you look in the Torah itself, it says again and again, keep these halachas because they reflect they are a route to get you to somewhere higher. If the Torah says kadoshim to you, or the Torah says, keep these halachas, ki kodesh ani, because I'm kodesh. What it's saying is, this is a route to a higher value, to kedusha. Again and again, the Torah says, you should choose life. You should choose that which is toiv and the good, and not that which is evil. In other words, behind the halachic system is something bigger and greater. We can call it meta halachic, we can call it values, however we want to call it, morals. There's something bigger and greater beyond that, which is being the core underlying values of the Torah, which are kedusha, or tzaddik, being godly, being a vehicle to bring the divine into the world, and whatever other terms one wants to use. And I'm using, by the way, morality as a shortcut. I can also, you can say the same thing with any value on. Keeping halacha is not synonymous with transcendence. Keeping halacha is not synonymous with being godly. Keeping halacha is not synonymous with being spiritual. Whatever label you want to give to all the world of the good that we humans wish to aspire to, halacha is a vehicle to it. It's a framework for it. It's a method, but it isn't it. It's a route to it, but it isn't it. And the Nevi'im, by the way, cry this out, right? When the Nevi'im say, now, to some degree, they're saying you're keeping one type of halacha and you're forgetting another type of halacha, because you're worrying about kabbalas, but you're not worrying about the Yosem and Almana, the poor and the needy and the vulnerable. But the deeper part of this behind this is, like the Rambam says, you can keep every halacha in the book and not be Kodesh. You can keep every halacha in the book and be a manuvala, a corroded and corrupt individual. So I'm making a modest point, which is they're not synonymous. They're a route and a vehicle, but by definition, it can't be synonymous and identical. I think I've said in the Sunday morning share before, but I'll repeat it again. Very, very interesting. Both the Zohar and the Rambam, and to the best of our knowledge, the Rambam didn't have access to the Zohar. I say to the best of our knowledge because there were mystical texts floating around, and the Rambam saw some of those and didn't like much of what he saw, but he did see some of these things. But both the Rambam and the Zohar refer to mitzvahs as eitzos. Now, eitzah normally is translated as advice. An eitzah, it's an advice. Now they don't mean by that. The Rambam at least doesn't mean by that. It's an Asas, and choose it. This is God's suggestions for what we should do. The Rambam writes this, by the way, in Mishnah Torah, not in his Mo'nevuchim. So this is not something lost in translation. This is not translation, and this is in Mishnah Torah, his halachic work. So this is not a non-halachic idea in any way at all. This isn't a sort of Rambam, again, he only writes it once, the best of my knowledge, in the whole Mishnah Torah. It's not something he writes again and again. But in one place, he refers to mitzvahs as eitzahs from Gedolah Eitzah, from the great advice giver, from the great Eitzah giver, from Hashem himself. What the Rambam means by that is, in the sense of advice, that it's a vehicle to something else. But the word Eitzah might be linked etymologically to the word Eitz, a tree. Like a tree, Tubishvat writes this is in Yonah Dioma. Like a tree is a vehicle and a means to get to a fruit, but the tree isn't the fruit itself. Similarly, the Eitzah is the means and the vehicle to get to the result, but it isn't the thing themselves. Leonard, I heard this from your Rabbi Moshe, to give you a little bit of nachas here. So Eitzah means it's a route and a vehicle to get somewhere, rather than being the being the end in itself. Mitzvahs are meant to mold us into certain sorts of people. They're meant to get us somewhere, but they aren't the end in themselves. This again, I want to emphasize in halachic Judaism, we believe if you're not keeping halachas, you're not going to get to that end. And you're also in disobedience of God. God has commanded us, and that's disobedience. That's a rebellion. That's ignoring God's given mitzvahs. But it doesn't mean to say that without mitzvahs one can't achieve some genuine and real moral achievements. And it doesn't mean to say that if you keep mitzvahs, one is guaranteed to have genuine and complete moral development. Then hopefully it will give some level of moral development if you're keeping tzedakah and chesed and tefillah and all the other things we do. Obviously it will give some morality in one's life. It doesn't mean to say, again, I just want to emphasize, all I'm saying is it's not synonymous. It doesn't mean that the sum totality of morality and the sum totality of halachas square up and exactly line up. Yeah.
Also, the question of morality and holiness are synonymous. I don't think they are. Well, I think you're suggesting that they are.
I'm evading the issue, and I'm using many terms for the desired goal that we humans want. Godliness, morality, holiness, transcendence, ruchnias, spirituality, whatever term you want to use, whatever the sum totality of that sphere, that is what we humans aspire to be goodness. I'm just saying halacha isn't kedusha. Halacha isn't synonymous with that. It's a means to get there. It's a legal framework which sets the structure to get there. It isn't identical with it. There's a there which it's a tool and a resource, an eitzah to get there. It's not synonymous with it. It's not identical with it. That's all. It's a modest claim. There's a claim that we often don't spell out. Now, what is the relationship between kedusha and godliness and transcendence and spirituality and morality and so on? We can add that to our list if someone reminds me afterwards. No, it's a really, really important question. We often actually use terms we don't think what they mean. What do we mean when we talk about being godly or spiritual or good? What actually do these terms mean? Or moral, for that matter? These are very, very difficult concepts. I'm evading them because the share is complicated enough as it is. As a whole. But whatever that dimension of what we humans want to be, maybe we've had two nominations of topics. A chumrah, I should make notes of this. Chumrah, and then kedusha, godliness, spirituality, transcendence, good, and then Zionism. Okay. It's simple, all done, yeah. Sorry, Avram, yes.
I remember a very strong shira I came to once, but you don't pass them by the internet. No, we all know how to find out how to psak on the internet.
Yes.
But the psak is much more than you can't use this. There's so many elements that fit into the psak. And whether you like it or not, when you go to them, that's why we don't we go to somebody who's much more who's a bigger picture and values people to that.
Okay, really, really important question. There's no doubt that values creep into a psak halacha, and there's no doubt that psak is person-centric. When the person who's asking me the shayla, when I know who they are, and when it's someone from the community who I have a relationship with, much easier to give a good psak for them. I volunteer or I'm involved with the Shayla Text Federation Shayla Text service, and I it's a very good service. But I always hope that no one I know is asking the shayla. for two reasons. First, because there's a range of Rabbanim that answer it, and different Rabbanim will give them answers. But secondly, I know even when I'm answering it, I give a much better answer when I know who the person is and I know where they're coming from. And to a degree that's hard to explain. Every halacha is very, very, very person-centric. And again, I'm sure professionals, and we've got professionals here in other fields, will say the same thing around accounts and law and other areas. There's many fields in which this is the case. As much as till I started having tax affairs, I always thought, accountancy and tax are very black and white, either yes or no. And then you understand it isn't. There's a subject. There has to be in all human application. There's degrees of subjectivity in how things are applied, and it's sensitive to the person and their circumstances. So again, I'm not claiming this is unique to halacha, but I only know my own field, so I can't comment about other fields. But in halacha, for sure, there is a degree to which it's applied to the person. But again, it's still clunky. It's still broad. It's still broad brushstrokes. It can't possibly deal with a system that is workable. Has to provide rules and regulations about how to behave. I also want to make another point the other way around. Again, I don't think this is fundamentally controversial. The Rambam, at least in his Moed Nevuchim, would agree with this comparison. But let me use a mashal from traffic regulations. I used this mashal when I spoke about din and demachos din at the beginning of COVID, and why I felt that din and demachos absolutely applied to health regulations, even when the health regulations were sometimes oversimplistic and therefore by definition somewhat contradictory. Because again, law has to have simple rules, and we know this, by the way, in Drabanons. This isn't controversial in Drabanons. Lo pelug. So Chazal make a takana. And the Gemara says about this, takana lo pelug, even though the reason round the particular rabbinic ordinance doesn't apply in this case, lo pelug, you can't have exceptions built. A rule has to be a rule and has to be followed. So again, I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, is the law, the Rabbanim, synonymous with morality? Again, the answer is, in a sense, no, because they're recognizing that in a particular case, there isn't a fundamental and intrinsic reason why you should keep this halacha. Nonetheless, you need to keep it because this is how rules have to work, and rules have to have a simplicity associated with them. So there's a morality touching on it in a certain respect. Look, why do I have to keep this particular halacha when I know for sure this risk doesn't apply to me? I want to blow shofar first day Rosh Hashanah. I'm desperate to blow shofar first day Rosh Hashanah. I know for sure I will not carry the shofar. I live in an area where there's an area for miles, and if there isn't, I know the halacha to Shabbos well, and I know I can't carry. Why can't I blow the shofar? The answer is because maybe someone maybe someone will end up carrying the shofar for Daled Amos. So for me personally, this is a spiritual loss. I should be blowing shofar, and I'm losing it. For the greater good of society and Klal Yisrael as a whole, this is a gain, because if I start blowing shofar, then you'll blow shofar, and you'll blow shofar, and you'll blow shofar, and you'll blow shofar, and eventually it'll trickle down to people who have a risk of carrying the shofar Daled Amos. Again, I'm not going into the details of the Gezerah. It's fascinating that the whole of Klal Yisrael loses shofar because one idiot thinks he can carry a shofar. I mean, this is ridiculous. What's going on over here? But this was the equation Chazal made, that the significance of ensuring that everyone in Klal Yisrael doesn't end up carrying the shofar. We all lose shofar. Okay, let's put that on the side. But in my individual circumstances, I'm convinced, I'll do it secretly when no one will be able to see. Look, that rules have to be in place to provide general structure. So the idea of laws having a general pattern is intrinsic, again, to a legal system. And the example I gave when I spoke about this was, there is no fundamental morality over a red light being stop and a green light being go. I don't think there's any reason why those colors should be chosen. Yeah, okay. And there may be situations where there's no reason I shouldn't go through the red light. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and I've checked right and left, and there isn't a car on the streets. Why on earth shouldn't I go through the red light? There's no morality in that. But a rule is a rule, a law is a law, and therefore it has to be in place. So again, I'm just emphasizing the same idea. Laws are there because you need general things. If everyone begins checking whether it's safe to go through the lights in individual circumstances, then eventually the whole traffic system breaks down, because I decide at 3 o'clock in the morning with no cars, it's okay. The next person decides at 1 o'clock in the morning with very few cars, it's okay. And the third person sees a small gap and thinks they can get through and whiz through the small gap safely, and then also says it's okay. So and then with that, the whole traffic system has broken down. So rules need to be general rules in order to ensure that they work. So again, there's nothing amoral about having that, but it simply brings out the point that morality and or transcendence or good values aren't synonymous with rules. The rule is in place because the rule always has to be in place, even though in my particular circumstance, no harm would occur were I not to do this. I just want to finish this off with a number of thoughts from the Ramban. And again, I'm quoting this from the Ramban because the Moed Nevuchim says the same thing, but I want to quote it from the Ramban because in a sense the Ramban is a more mainstream figure in this respect. He's representing a much larger swathe of thought. The Ramban says this in, I spoke about this actually in my Parsha here not too long ago. The Ramban says this in the context of Yaakov marrying two sisters. He says it in the context of Yehuda and Tamar and the whole story over there. He says it on several occasions. The Nefesh HaChaim, Reb Chaim of Volozhin says this. The Rambam in his Moed Nevuchim says similar things. He says it's possible there could be situations where it is absolutely clear and obvious to me that my spiritual goals, we can call them moral goals, transcendent goals, godly goals, my spiritual goals would be best fulfilled by not keeping a particular halacha. And nonetheless, I have no choice because we are post Matan Torah, we're post the giving of the Torah, and we are now commanded to do this. To put that differently, there's a greater moral value behind it. The obedience to our Creator trumps my own personal, individual, and specific needs. But it is possible that I can know for sure, I can know with certainty, that my spiritual goals will be best achieved by an example of Yaakov marrying two sisters or the like. And nonetheless, I can't do that post Matan Torah. I can't do that after the Torah because once halacha has been put in place, there's a legal system that we have to follow, and we have no choice about it. The Ramban says this, the Moed Nevuchim says it in different forms. It's possible, says the Moed Nevuchim, that there's something that for me as an individual is good and of personal benefit, but it would lead to a slippery slope, it would lead to the breakdown in society, it would lead to other people doing this, and for them it isn't good. There has to be a rule that is put in place because in general we need society to behave in line with certain practice. Never, even though for me as an individual it means a tremendous loss, nonetheless this is the right thing to do. So in one sense, this is a morality of sorts or a goodness of sorts, because I have a responsibility to care about broader society. I have a responsibility to listen to Hashem. But on a more particular level, it's possible that for me, this isn't an ideal. Nonetheless, this is what I have to do because we live in a post-Matan Torah world. We live in a world in which I'm commanded to do things. And this is how I need to behave. So again, the Rambam says this in his Moed, and the Ramban says this in his Peirush on the Torah. Reb Chaim Volozhin writes this in the context of the rise of Chassidus, when there was the suspicion, again a matter of considerable debate and interest, whether this suspicion was correct or not, or whether it was unfounded. But there was a suspicion that there was a strain of antinomianism in Chassidus. That means discarding of halacha for greater spiritual goals. There was a fear that the part of the revolution of Chassidus and the fire and enthusiasm and energy that was brought to mitzvahs meant that they could push aside halacha on occasion in order to achieve a spirituality of sorts. And this was part of the great fear of the opponents of Chassidus. Whether there really existed such a trend or not, and if it did, how widespread it really was, is again beyond the scope of this discussion. Part of the purpose of his work, Nefesh HaChaim, was to make matters clear, in which he said, he didn't reply by saying, Chas v'shalom, there's no such thing. He said, I accept there could be scenarios in which spirituality would call upon me to do things different to halacha, but nonetheless, we have no choice. We are bound. We are creatures, created beings, commanded by Hashem in a covenantal relationship with him. We've agreed to this. We have no choice but to keep halacha, even though in this particular individual and specific circumstance, I'm convinced that this was against me. And Yaakov, before Matan Torah, had the flexibility. Us, post-Matan Torah, don't. I'll just conclude with the Ramban, who indicates in one place that this is one of the advantages of legal loopholes. He says, why are there legal loopholes in the Torah? Why can't the Torah exactly match? So the first point he makes is what we've just spoken about now, which is that no legal system can deal with every circumstance. Torah is complicated enough and large enough as it is, as is every legal system. Laws grow and grow and multiply, case examples and so on. But if law would cover every circumstance, it would be as large, the law books would be as large as the universe itself. It would have to deal with every situation. But a related point he makes is that sometimes loopholes are useful, therefore. That's why there are creative methods. Any good halachist, any good legal, again in other legal systems also, can find loopholes. And sometimes it's appropriate to use these loopholes because of circumstances, and a loophole builds flexibility into a halachic system. So we have a Heta Iska, we have a Mechiras Chometz, we spoke about in the context of Shemitah, whether that's Mechira and so on. But the proponents of each allowance in each case believe that this is appropriate to use the legal loophole, even though this is a workaround and circumventing the law, because they believe in this particular circumstances, there's reasons why creativity and so on should be used to mean that halacha is kept. But nonetheless, it's not true to the spirit of the halacha. It's a workaround in the halacha. It's a justifiable halachic mechanism, and it's used will, and it's used because there's a need that's there. So sometimes the clunkiness of law can also allow a loophole to be found. Sometimes the clunkiness of law means it doesn't exactly match the moral circumstances. The loophole has to be accurate, it has to be in line with halacha, it has to be worked through by experts, not just draw any loophole out of the hat. It has to be true to Torah values for it to be accurately applied, otherwise it's a contradiction and an abuse of Torah. Nonetheless, this is another advantage in halacha having within it space for loopholes. So again, I'm making a modest claim over here that sometimes halacha and morality aren't completely synonymous. And to tie this back to our original discussion, this is also part of the Rambam's more controversial view of the slow development of humanity, that sometimes it is appropriate for law to set a lower threshold, a threshold which isn't the highest moral standard, but is a decent moral standard because of a reluctant compromise with where real live people are up to. Real live soldiers were not up to a higher standard than Ishaya Fastoya, the laws of the beautiful captive. Real live Jews were not up to higher standards than sacrifices. And real live Jews, according to Rav Rabinovich, the extension of this, were not up to higher standards of slavery. This isn't an ideal, but this is law compromises with the reality of human nature, vegetarianism, according to Rav Kook, and so on, and countless examples. And there may be very good and profound reasons why law doesn't set the highest moral standard. It may be we're not up to it. It maybe it's appropriate under the circumstance. Had Jews not been allowed to have slaves, maybe the Jewish kingdom would have fallen, wouldn't have been able to survive, and its economy would have crumbled. Maybe slaves were necessary for economic functioning. Maybe there's a moral advantage in having Jews buying slaves, because if they act on the slave market, they will bring slaves into the Jewish world who will be treated radically better than the broader society was treating them. Whereas if slaves are allowed or not allowed, and no Jew was buying slaves, the slaves would be worse treated. So there may be reasons why compromise is appropriate, but nonetheless, it doesn't mean that in and of in itself the Torah's allowance of slavery or korbanos has to mean that this or meat has to mean that this is a ideal, a moral ideal. Halacha and morality and spirituality are interlinked. They're related. They have a complex relationship. Each time we need to probe how they interact and how they relate to each other, but it's not as simplistic as just saying they're synonymous. They're not identical. There's a difference between the two. Now we need to spend the rest of our lives learning. So what is an interplay between the two? Chas v'shalom to say that there's no interaction. I didn't mean to say that, and if I gave that impression, God forbid. But equally, it is incorrect to say it's as simple as they're identical, that they're one and the same. They relate to each other in a complex way. And this is what the Rambam calls upon us to think about. And as I said, degrees of this conversation are recognized by the Ramban, Reb Chaim Volozhin, and many other mainstream thinkers. Rav Kook. So, okay, I'm sorry we've got over our time. I apologize, but I wanted to finish the subject of morality. And next week we will do one of Chumrah, spirituality and Zionism. I think we'll start with Zionism because we've done a lot of high-level, highfalutin philosophy. Let's do something a bit more hands-on. So we'll do Zionism and then we'll look at Chumrah after that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, someone wrote here, Gödel. I can't see actually who wrote that to me. Yeah, prove that all systems, those obeying the rules of arithmetic, will have unprovable truths to imply that no legal system can be exhausted. That is 100% correct. We now know that mathematically, no logical system can include every detail. Someone wrote to me, is that saying that Torah is not perfect? No, Torah is perfect. It's perfectly attuned to the reality of human life. We humans aren't just moral and spiritual machines. We're real flesh and blood humans, and Torah is perfectly attuned to addressing that reality. A gezerah which is just not realistic to where the community is up to will not be a good gezerah because people simply can't do it. Yeah. But no, Avram, no.
Good, thank you.
Very good. Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.